Well, good morning from St. Bart's in Midtown Manhattan. My name is Peter Thompson. I serve as the vicar here, and together with my colleague, the Reverend Meredith Ward, our Associate Rector for Pastoral Care, it is our delight to welcome you to the forum where each week we have sacred conversations about the things that matter. And on this weekend, we are especially happy to have a conversation about a longtime friend of St. Bart's, Frances Hesselbein, and a new documentary that has been made about her called Defining Moments. And you'll have a chance to view that documentary after the 11 a.m. service today. So we hope, especially if you're intrigued and inspired by what you hear this morning, that you'll come back and stay after the 11 a.m. service and get a chance to see this documentary in a private screening right here in this room. So our guests today are all involved in the creation of this film. From the far left, we have David Schlaer, the director of Defining Moments, Sarah MacArthur, the executive producer, who is also the editor-in-chief of the Leader to Leader Journal, which is the journal that Frances Hesselbein founded, and then Beverly Jacobson Schlaer, the producer of the film. Thank you to all three of you for being here.
So welcome back to St. Bart's. As we just begin, tell us a little bit about who Frances was. Who was she, and what was her great contribution? Sarah, maybe you want to take that.
Good morning. Can you hear me? Now can you hear me?
It might take a second to warm up.
Hello. Now can you hear me?
A little bit. We might have to turn it up a bit. We'll take care of that.
Good morning. Nice to see everyone. I don't think you could possibly know how excited I am that we are back here. And I always use the phrase we, because it's always Frances and I, friends of the heart, and then everybody that's here today. So who was Frances? Briefly, Frances was one of the greatest leaders of the 20th and 21st centuries. She was former CEO of the Girl Scouts from 1976 to 1990. She lived a long and service-oriented life. She was born in 1915, and she passed away in December of 2022. She is the first woman to chair a United Way campaign. She was the first woman and the first civilian to chair be the 1951 chair at West Point. She was the editor-in-chief of Leader to Leader Journal. Frances Hesselbein was a great friend, a great colleague, a great battle buddy, and just a great leader.
So she really was a leader of leaders in the sense of she taught leadership to some of the major leaders of this country and beyond. What was her vision of leadership? And what was her legacy? What is her legacy?
Well, Frances was a leader of leaders, and she was also a leader of those who were going to become leaders. The soft spot for Frances, I would think, depending on who she was talking to, was young people. So Frances was very focused on our bright future. And those are the young people of today. So she was very involved with Girl Scouts. Those are our young people. And her contribution to leadership would probably be, best signified by her personal definition of leadership, which is leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. It is the quality of our character that determines performance and results. And that definition of leadership was Frances's personal definition, and it's also become widely accepted as other people having that same definition. Who we are will have everything to do with our performance and results.
Okay. So one of the things, and I don't think this is working, but I can shout out, 10 years ago, there's a recording of Frances doing exactly what we're doing now. She was a member of this auspicious, beautiful congregation, and she was speaking to your then pastor, Reverend Minister. I'm not familiar with the terminology that's utilized in this congregation. However, it was a lengthy conversation she had at this forum, and it is so beautiful. And to think that it's 10 years later, and here we sit, being able to have a conversation about her. She lived to 107 years old and passed away 2 years ago. And she led from the heart, as Sarah is describing, and we had never met her. So it's just an example of how someone may not be here physically, but can still carry on their legacy, regardless of whether they're a physical presence. They can still be a very real and connected presence to all of us who are here in physical form.
Did you want to say something, David? You mentioned that she lived to be 107, which is quite amazing. And she was going right up till the very end of her life. She never really stopped. What was her secret, Sarah? Or did she have some special...
Frances's secret. Thank you so much for that question. I thought about it ever since I read it yesterday, that this was going to be the question. So I'm going to let you know that, okay, pretend I'm Frances just for a moment. And this is Frances's secret. So you're going to ask me my blood type.
What's your blood type?
B positive. That was Frances's secret.
Yeah. She really was extraordinarily, always positive facing. Beverly.
And she told that to this congregation, because if you listen to that 2014, right, that audio tape, if you listen to that, we did that last night twice, and when you listen to that, you hear her being asked at that time, things were a little challenging in the world and in the country, and she said the way she looks at life is because of her blood type, B positive, and she does not look at things as being a challenge, but as an opportunity.
Beverly and Sarah, you both mentioned that Frances herself was a guest at the forum. She was a few days shy of her 100th birthday when she was here almost exactly 10 years ago, and it's a fascinating recording to listen to her talking with the Reverend Buddy Stallings. And Sarah, you've mentioned you were here with her many, many times. Can you talk about when she first became associated with St. Bart's and why this community mattered to her?
So I was here with Frances a number of times, and I'm not sure exactly when she became a member of St. Bart's. I know that she had an office across the street at Mutual of America. And so she was here all the time. She was in the city all the time. She also has had a home in Easton, Pennsylvania. But she was working here in the office so much of the time. She also had an apartment here in New York City. And she would look across at St. Bart's, and she loved St. Bart's. And she also, because she was here so much, she wasn't able to go to her church in Easton, Pennsylvania. So she decided to come here. And she found here the same thing that I think probably, well, I know I find here, is that this is one of the most welcoming churches, the kindest, one of the kindest places I've ever been. And I know Frances felt the same way. We would have girls' weekends quite a bit. So we'd meet here in New York City, Frances and I, we'd do some work, and then we'd go have a girls' weekend in Easton, Pennsylvania. So spend a lot of time there. And one day we came back here, and it was, I think, Rector Stallings, he was going to retire. So it was his retirement party, and she absolutely loved him. And he's the one who interviewed her for the forum. And she said, do you mind if we go by St. Bart's today? We'll go to the service, and then we'll celebrate the retirement of Reverend Stallings. And so we did. And so I was sort of brought into St. Bart's and that feeling of that happens here, that feeling of welcome and inclusion here at St. Bart's.
Frances died in 2022, and one of her services was here. I know Meredith had a key role in planning it. We both were here and participated in the service. Can you talk about that? What that was like for you?
That was incredible. We had, after Frances passed away, we had 3 services. One was a funeral in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and that was in December, end of December 2022. One was here at St. Bart's, and then we had a third in Easton, Pennsylvania, where Frances had her home. And the one here was the grand affair. Francie Ekman, you'll see her in the film later. She's Frances's niece, and she coordinated Johnstown. The Easton service, you'll see another person who coordinated that, Carrie Ward, and she'll be here later today as well, a dear friend of Frances. She coordinated Easton. I got St. Bart's. It was amazing. I myself had the most extraordinarily beautiful celebration. And the good news was, Frances, she had outlined in her last will and testament exactly how she wanted it to be. So she outlined the where it would be, St. Bart's, when it would be, who would speak, and she even, there's a man, Patrick Hale, hopefully he'll be here later today as well, and he's a beautiful singer. And so she had one song that she wanted him to do, Going Home. And so I asked everyone to play their part, as Frances had outlined. And we love Frances so much, all of us, that everybody wanted to do a lot more than that. So Patrick said, oh, you know, I've got 2 other songs I know she'd love. And I said, I'm sorry, that's not what Frances wanted. So we were able to keep it exactly like she wanted. And it was the most beautiful service, and all of us sharing our love for her that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. So thank you for that.
Oh, it was our joy and pleasure to be a part of that. So we know she had an extraordinary life. What was the impetus for wanting to make a documentary about her? What prompted that idea?
I'm going to just say a tiny bit about that, and then we have 2 really important people who are going to be able to say something. For me, so simple. Since I met Frances, I've wanted to be around her. One of the books that I did is called Work is Love Made Visible. It's just a love letter to Frances. I want to share who she was and how she led, and with everyone. Documentary is the same thing, to share who she was and how she led, the impact she's had on all of us, and the impact that we in turn are having on others. So for me, that was why I wanted to do this so much. And it just so happened that I was introduced to Beverly first, actually, through a friend, and I'll let them take it from here.
So when we were first introduced to Francis's story through Sarah, we'd never heard of her. We had a lot of questions. She shared with us an article called Defining Moment, which, if you see the documentary later, you'll get some insight into that. But a couple lines stood out in the article, and one was, the greatest threat to our democracy is the lack of civility. And the other was that the world is anxious to call forth leaders that use language that heals. And language was very important, and the choice of language to Francis. So when we read those two lines, that was our buy-in. It's like, yeah, we want to be part of this. We want to help tell this story. So that's how we got involved, from my perspective.
And then not only were we drawn into the magnetic pull of that article, Defining Moments, from the Leader to Leader Journal that Francis had written, the funeral service from St. Bart's, which we saw a couple of months later, live streamed, and the individuals that participated in that service, knowing that Francis had planned that service and the way it unfolded, we were literally drawn to her as an individual. Now, of course, we were saddened that we could not interview her. She was frail at the end of her life. However, we knew, as Sarah just told you, that she had planned the service herself. And when we saw those individuals and how they spoke of her and the way she was memorialized, we knew we had to tell this story because her writing drew us in. By that time, we had read one of her books that really was telling the story of her life in her words. We knew that we couldn't say no to this story.
How did your understanding of her work and life change over the course of making the film?
Well, I don't know that it changed so much as evolved. So one of the benefits I think we had is that we knew nothing about Francis. So it was this journey of discovery. So we were able to, every time we would meet someone who knew her, we were genuinely asking questions about her. What was it? About some of her philosophies. It's like, well, what does that mean? So we're constantly trying to translate to broader audiences. And sometimes they see that as our role as translators from one world to another. And so, again, I don't know if it changed, but it evolved in a very rich way.
And the ability to have people who may not be familiar with the way she spoke and how she led, to be able to have them resonate with the messages that she carried, the values that she held. Some of them seem so simple on the surface, but not necessarily are they translatable in the way that she spoke them. And many of the values that she holds, I want to say it in the present tense because I feel like she's still here, although she's not here physically. The values that she holds are values that many of us hold. And that's really seminal to the message in this film.
Speak about the ripple effect from Tom.
David wants me to speak, so what I see it as is Francis has a ripple effect on other people's lives. She has this ability to engage people through the power of story. She tells her stories and we can relate to them. And that has a truly magnetic effect on other people. And I know Sarah can talk about this because she can talk about it from this perspective of leadership and how she led and how she affected those people. I may tell it in a different way, but Sarah has the ability to tell it from the people who she affected on a daily basis, and now they lead us in all the various sectors of our culture and our society.
Beautifully put. I was just thinking of in creating the film, the evolving of what I know about Frances, I realize I know nothing. Like I realize the more I learn, the more I don't know when it comes to Frances. I mean, every word has this, I can take a deep dive. I mean, every word that she used, I can take a deep dive. But what I do know is that one of the greatest learnings for me, a couple of them, one happened when in 2020, when the world was in such dire straits. And I was in Easton, living in Easton, and Frances was living here in New York City because she wasn't able to go back and forth like she had been. And I called her up on the phone and I said, Frances, you know, what will we do? How will we get through this? And she said, we will get through this together. That was one of the greatest learnings that I had from Frances. And another one that was so important was actually after she passed away. So I was the lucky recipient of thousands and thousands of emails and calls and texts and people visiting, thousands and thousands. And from all across, all walks of life, just all over the place. And the greatest learning for me was right then when all these wonderful messages of who she was and how she led, how much people loved her. And I realized then, you know, we must be pretty good people. If we can love someone like Frances as much as we do for who she was and how she led, we must be really good people. And that's been one of the things that I carry with me now all the time, is that we must be pretty good people if we can love someone like Frances Hesselbein the way we do.
David, you alluded to Frances's comments on democracy and civility, and the very beginning of the movie, as you see scenes of Pennsylvania where Frances was from and lived all her life, you hear her say these words, and they struck me enough as resonant with this current moment that I wrote them all down. In our country and in many parts of the world, we have the lowest level of trust and the highest level of cynicism in my whole lifetime. What will sustain the democracy is the big question. And I know that we had a presidential election this week. That same question that Frances had on her mind is one that many have on their minds. I'm curious why you all started the film with that question, and what do you think Frances would have to say to our current political moment?
We started with that because it brings her and the story right into the present time, to this day, to the weeks that just passed, to the weeks that are coming up. So it makes it very relevant. In a sense, it's almost like an invocation for the story to come. And you kind of have to stay tuned and watch the documentary to hear what she thinks about that. But one of the things that's very important to her is respect for all people. And it comes through very strongly in her personality and her presence. And that was a key element of Frances. So I don't know, that's about all I can say about that right now. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Absolutely. That question is so important. And what I find just so enlightening about that question is that Frances didn't ask that yesterday. Mm. And she didn't ask it last week. In fact, she didn't ask it within the last 2 years. She asked that years ago. Years ago. And so I look at it like, oh, we have work to do. There's work to do. And who has taught me what work is work is my love made visible. So I just feel like we have work to do.
And finding common language was another one of her key teachings, I guess I would say teachings. So it's like we all have different perspectives on the world as we see it. We all use different language, and some of those words trigger different things. We always think people see things the way we do, but they don't at all. So we have to find other ways to communicate other than words. And that's where it's not a matter of what to do, it's a matter of how to be.
And choosing language that heals is so relevant, whether it was when Frances, you can hear by the tenor of her voice that it is quite, that she recorded that quite a long time ago. So that could have been recorded in the days of Abraham Lincoln. I mean, that's how relevant it is to who we are as a culture and a society. So we must always choose language that heals. So my perception, I mean, I never met physical Frances, but my perception of the language that I choose and who I am as an individual has transformed throughout the making of this documentary. I mean, we become engaged in the films that we make, and this has been truly a transformative experience, thanks to Frances, thanks to who she was, how she led, and the effect that she's had on all of us.
And just to plug the documentary a little more for maybe to you to watch, is it's told in Frances's voice, in Frances's presence. So we scoured archives and the internet and found a ton of interviews with Frances, selected the proper excerpts to tell this particular story. So she tells her own story in the documentary.
With a little help.
From a lot of great friends.
We're not going to tell you how.
Frances was a leader for leaders of all types and stripes, but she had a particular interest in elevating leaders who were women. And I'm wondering if you can talk about that aspect of her, I want to say ministry, but of her career and mission and the state of women's leadership today.
Well, again, with a personal story, I, of course, knew Frances for quite a long time, and there's a group of us, we call us Friends of Frances, and we, especially during COVID, we met every week with Frances on a Zoom call. At first, she was on the phone, and then we got her to join us on Zoom, so on a Zoom call. And there was about 9 of us or 10 of us, and what I found, I love the women. They're wonderful. They're all mentees of Frances, like myself. And I remember one time we did like a panel for University of Pittsburgh, a workshop panel for their Frances Hesselbein Global Leader Academy. So it was the Friends of Frances. We were all part of a panel, and we were going to talk about Frances's leadership and impact on women. And I was putting together the bios of these women, and I was amazed at the accomplishments of these women that were assembling around Frances in all different sectors. So we had someone who was in we have someone who is in corporate finance. We had me. We had someone who was in real estate. We had someone who was in the Coast Guard, someone who was at West Point. We had 2 people who are in education, 1 woman from the Girl Scouts at these incredibly high levels. And we weren't when we met Frances. She helped bring out in us this desire to serve our communities and our industries where our talents lied, and the communities that we were involved in. I was incredibly amazed at just that, and that's just a tiny tiny bit of who Frances has impacted across the sectors, across the ages, across the sexes, across the races. I mean, all across. I don't know if I can do this because I haven't really practiced it very well, but I'm going to try. So Frances was, as we say, she was involved public sector, private sector, and social sector. So if you could you please raise your hand if you've worked in a nonprofit? Okay. Raise your hand if you have worked in the social sector. That's the same thing. Raise your hand if you've worked in the private sector. Now raise your hand if you've worked in the social sector. And I'm pretty sure every one of you has raised your hand once. All of us who've raised our hands have been impacted by Frances's leadership. Isn't that incredible?
So we have some time for your questions. If you're here in the room, Suzanne Forster has question cards. Just raise your hand, she'll bring one around to you and then bring those questions up to us. If you're joining us online, you can type your questions into the live chat on YouTube, the comments on Facebook, or you can email me, pthompson@stbarts.org. Email also works if you're here in the room. While we're waiting for those questions, Frances led for 14 years an iconic American organization and brand, the Girl Scouts. That was not all that Frances did by any means, but I wonder if you can reflect specifically on that period of her life and work.
I don't know that I'm the best one to answer this, but from what I learned in doing this is Frances was first involved with the Girl Scouts in about 1950 when a local troop leader asked her to take on a troop because they had lost their leader. And she said, I don't know anything about girls. I have a young boy. I'm not interested. I can't help you. So the woman was very persistent, so she reluctantly agreed to take it on. After she did that, she became very involved then in the Girl Scouts in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania, and at the same time started to self-educate herself on leadership. And one of the people that she became enthralled with was Peter Drucker. And so she studied his works. Then she brought some of his books in to help with some of the women that she worked with. To make it short, she was asked to come to New York and interview for the executive director of the Girl Scouts of America, of which she wasn't really interested. She didn't think it would happen anyway. They weren't serious because they'd never hired anyone from within. So she went to the meeting, and she just threw fate to the wind, and they asked her what she would do, and she laid out this plan having to do with diversity and inclusion, updating their programs from mostly cooking skills and homemaking to incorporate science and technology and leadership. So to her surprise, they offered her the job. So that's how she got to New York. And then within that 14 years, she totally transformed the Girl Scouts.
Those are some questions from the audience, but while Peter's reviewing those, the other organization that she had a huge impact on was West Point, where she taught and lectured extensively, and it's quite extraordinary when you take a look at the documentary to see the military leaders listening attentively to this rather diminutive woman. She had a huge impact there. What do you think it was that resonated in her message with the cadets at West Point and these major military leaders?
think it's what resonates with everyone with whom Frances resonates. It's the principles-based how to be leadership that she exampled for us. So when you go to West Point, on their walls of the museum and around, courage, honor, duty, that's the foundation. And for Frances, whose life principles were similar, she just resonated with them. And also, Frances was, maybe 5 feet tall, and she's surrounded by all these soldiers, and she was quiet. So when she spoke, she didn't yell at you. Always had to lean in. And so I remember seeing her with all these, officers and cadets and everything, and she'd stand there and she'd say something like this, and they'd all lean in. Everyone wanted to hear what she had to say because every word she chose mattered. And that's, I think, what happens when a leader is speaking. Just a natural leader is speaking. We all want to hear every word that she says and then bring it into our own daily lives. So honor, courage, duty, respect for all people. Leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. It is the quality of my character that determines performance and results. Bright future, listen first, speak last. Then one of the things that I'm not sure if the military loves so much, but I know they probably did, and all the rest of us do, is that Frances would always say she had invisible tattoos. And she would tell you all about them. There's one here from Peter Drucker, ask, don't tell, right? Then over on this side is listen first, speak last. And all across the front, leadership is a matter of how to be, not how to do. And what was interesting is I would always try and remember exactly what these tattoos were. They changed every time, depending on what the person or group or me needed to know at that moment. That's why they were invisible. She could change them.
That's great.
Well, another one that they resonated with is the term to serve is to live,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And also, in the area where she was born and raised, there is a cemetery that goes back in her lineage to the Revolutionary War. And many of the people, men mostly, that are buried in that cemetery are officers and infantrymen that have served in the military. And it's pretty astounding to know that her lineage in the military of her family goes back that far. And it was in her bones to be a part of the military in some fashion.
And it's not surprising to me at all that today is the day before Veterans Day. And so for those of you who have served, we would just like to say thank you for your service. And Frances, if she were here, would say exactly the same.
We have a few questions on the forces that shaped Frances. The first is about her faith. You mentioned she had a church back in Pennsylvania. She became a member of St. BART'S as well. To the extent that you spoke with Frances about her faith, what did her faith mean to her?
Frances's faith is about providence. She was, her family background, her grandfather, Papa Wicks, was Justice of the Peace in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. A long lineage of spiritual leanings and always keeping the faith. That's a really important part of who Frances was. She kept the faith, and the faith didn't have to be a particular religion. The faith was in humanity, in us. I remember I would always go, "Oh, Frances, I'm so glad we met. I'm just so glad we met. And, you know, isn't it just neat?" And she would say, "It is providential that we should meet." Every time. And she said it to everyone, that we're exactly where we're supposed to be at this given moment, no matter what, even if we don't like it.
How did Frances's childhood shape her adult life?
No, you go ahead.
Well, this is a great story, and it's really all in the documentary. But she had an incident that happened to her when she was a young girl, and it had to do with two vases that were in her home that her grandmother would not let her touch. The rest of the story, you're going to have to see the documentary because it happened when she was a young girl, and it shaped her entire life. And it created the foundation or foundational principle of respect for all people. And Frances, the wonderful thing that we found, no matter who we spoke to, whether it be generals, titans of industry, educators, they all said that Frances told them the same story in the same way of how she held respect for all people as a foundational principle in her life, and they transmitted that to them, and very carefully chose the language in which she told that story so that each and every one of them heard the same story. They may have heard it over and over again, but they heard the same story and gave them the opportunity to understand how important respecting all people was for her, and then gave them the opportunity to understand respect for all people for them. For instance, when Frances became a troop leader in the 50s, she brought in a woman of color to be her assistant troop leader. That had never happened in the Girl Scouts. And so here she was in the early 50s, recognizing how important diversity and inclusion was to us as a people. So this is the early 50s, and she carried that through her entire career. So she was an example for us at every level, at every step she took. And we got to see that. I mean, I didn't meet her personally. I keep saying it like I knew her personally. I didn't. But I got to see that through working on her life story.
How did Frances become an authority on leadership?
I would say Frances would say she wasn't an authority on leadership. We made her an authority on leadership because we love who she was and how she led. We loved the impact that she had on us. And we loved it so much that we in turn want to have that impact on others.
Some questions about the documentary. One is, if we can't come to the screening later today, how can we view it? And the second is, how long is it?
It's 45 minutes. At this time, it's basically being presented in private screenings like today. Sarah is organizing those, and we're very open to creating other private screenings. We don't know how far out until it's basically freely available to the public. But if you have ideas about groups you're involved with, arenas that you think people could resonate, we're very open to talking to you about helping to create other screenings like today.
So we are just about out of time. A final question is, what is one aspect of Frances's life, or one thing she has taught you that you most want to leave with this group today?
I think for me, it goes back to the title, Defining Moment. And I I don't know how much it comes out in the film, but one of our intentions was to hopefully inspire everyone that sees it to think about what her defining moment was and to be introspective about that and think back on our own life about a particular moment that basically set the course for the rest of our life. And then the next thing that comes with that is keeping the faith. How much do you stay honed to that, which goes back to basically that's the mission. And then what's the vision you had for that? And how are your values attuned to that? So for me, that's my internal message that I would like people to resonate with.
So many things I could say here, and I'll just say that one of the things that Frances taught me long time ago is that work is love made visible. And I've talked a lot about this with our friend Alan Mullally, and we've come up with this wonderful way of looking at that because it's important to really think about it. And we look at it like our one life is our life's work, and that is our love made visible. So it's been a wonderful time to get to learn from Frances, and I'm so fortunate. Thank you so much. We're so fortunate to continue to get to learn today here. When people ask questions, I learn so much more. So thank you so much for having us. We appreciate it.
And my last thing, to piggyback on both of them, I get to do that because I'm last, is what would I want people to say about me when I'm gone? My purpose, my vision, how I execute that is important. But what would they say about me when I'm gone? Did I live those values?
Please join me in thanking David, Beverly, and Sarah. So as mentioned, we hope that you'll stick around, and after our 11 a.m. service at 1 p.m. here in this room, we'll have a screening of Defining Moments, and you'll get to see the film, and we'll have some time for conversation after the film as well. So we do hope if you're able, you'll be able to stick around and join us. We also hope you'll be back for the forum next week. Our clergy will be reflecting on the election that we had this last week and sharing some thoughts and engaging in conversation with you. So see you then.